Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the post-game podcast from a playoff-like regular season game between the Wolves and the Celtics, the top team in the West visiting the top team in the East. And despite missing two starters, the Timberwolves led big in the final couple minutes of regulation. The game went to overtime. The Wolves fell short. We'll talk about Jayson Tatum's unbelievable performance and also a really impressive wire-to-wire Wolves performance in this one, too. We'll break down the whole thing here today on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Happy Thursday, everybody, and fantastic basketball game Wednesday night between the Wolves and the Celtics. Certainly a top, top three game this season, probably along with the other Boston game back at the early part of November. Really, really fun. Lots to get to today on the show. And, we'll talk about kind of the end of the game overall, how I thought the Wolves played some really impressive individual performances. Shake Milton sighting, he played really well. Lots of stuff to talk about here. A big thank you right off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right, so quickly setting the stage. The Wolves come into this game after a big 21-point win in Orlando Tuesday night, and they'd led by as many as 34 in that game. Of course, weather in Orlando, so they don't travel until the day of the game, until Wednesday morning. They travel all the way up to Boston from Orlando. It's just the third back-to-back the Wolves have played this season. And Mike Conley sits due to rest. Rudy Gobert is questionable due to hip soreness and ends up sitting out, so we'll chalk those both up to rest. And so the Wolves are without two starters in this game. The Celtics, Drew Holiday was questionable coming in, and the Celtics were basically full strength in this game. Like, all their key players played. So this was like, coming into this, I believe the Celtics were up to, I think when we recorded the Minnesota basketball party on Wednesday morning, the Celtics were favored by maybe 8.5 points on FanDuel. And this thing was 9.5 when I looked mid-afternoon before it was announced that Rudy was out, but after it was announced, before Rudy was announced as out, after they announced Conley was out. So I don't know where it closed, but the Wolves were 9.5 point underdogs in this game. Minnesota comes in, game 4 of the road trip, back-to-back with travel issues, no Conley, no Gobert, and hangs with the Celtics the entire game. In fact, Minnesota got to within a point by halftime. They were down, I think, 6 at the end of the first quarter. They get to within a point by halftime, lead the game by 6 going into the fourth quarter, and then actually have a lead of 9 points with just under 4 minutes to play, 7 points with about 2.5 to play in regulation. But they aren't able to hold on in overtime. So I want to break all that down a little bit. The first thing, first quarter was kind of good for both teams. Like, the Wolves held their own. They were down 10 points a couple of times, but they were, in it throughout, and ultimately only down by 6 at the end of the first frame. Second quarter, the Wolves started Nickeil Alexander-Walker essentially at point guard, and they started Kyle Anderson in place of Gobert. Sliding Towns to center allows Naz Reid to stay with the second unit, allows Jordan McLaughlin to stay with the second unit, with the expectation he'd probably play a little bit more in this game. Of course, he's been part of the rotation now the last couple of weeks. And that also meant that Shake Milton was going to see some rotation minutes for the first time in a couple of weeks as well. And then in the second quarter, Shake Milton and Jordan McLaughlin come in the game, and they both play really, really well. In fact, the Wolves were fine in the first quarter, but when things really started to turn, it was when the Wolves bench outplayed the Boston bench in the second quarter. And I will say, Boston's starting lineup is the best starting lineup in the NBA. Like, there's no question about it. It's unbelievable. The Wolves bench, even shorthanded, is every bit as good as the Celtics bench. And of course, with Naz Reid off the bench, they far outproduced the Celtics bench in this game, which should not have been a surprise to anybody. I mean, the Celtics have guys that, like, I'm very curious to see what they do. Side note, what they do at the deadline buyout market. I mean, like, there's a couple guys on that bench that should not be playing heavy playoff minutes. But all that to say, the Timberwolves bench is what got them in a good spot in the second quarter. Some really strong Shake Milton minutes. Like, he played really well in 9 minutes in this game total. He played a little in the second half. He was a +8. Jordan McLaughlin had some good minutes, actually hit 2 3-pointers right after he came into the game. The Celtics kind of left him and he knocked them both down, which is good to see from McLaughlin as well. So it was the Wolves bench that really kind of gave them a boost. And then a flurry at the end of the second quarter. Ant had a big dunk right before the end of the half that got the Wolves to within 1. And then the third quarter, Minnesota really flexed their muscle. The third quarter was Karl-Anthony Towns, and it was Anthony Edwards doing Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards things, but doing like true superstar things. They both had moments in the third quarter that were absolutely unbelievable. Cat hit a couple of tough shots. Ant hit the crossover he had against Drew Holiday. There were actually a couple of crossover step backs that he had that were unbelievable, but the one he had for a 3 in pick and roll, Drew Holiday was on him on the right side of the floor, and Ant crossed him over just inside the 3-point line. And if you're putting Drew Holiday on skates, and this wasn't just like, lazy, this was Drew Holiday playing defense. Ant puts him on skates, which, by the way, that's who Ant beat the open floor for the dunk at the end of the first half too. Maybe it wasn't that dunk. There was a dunk in transition where Drew Holiday was actually in front of him and backpedaling a little, but Ant crossed him over, got to the rim. And then he puts Holiday on skates, hits a step back 3. There was a dunk in there too that was impressive. Cat, like, the third quarter was just an absolute clinic from Minnesota. They outscored the Celtics by 7, and it was almost entirely the Timberwolves superstars, which wasn't the case the rest of the game. So that's why I want to highlight that here. Like, coming out of halftime, Cat hits a shot right away. Horford comes down and hits a 3. Cat hits another shot. The Celtics hit another 3. McDaniels hits a 3. And then a couple possessions later, it's consecutive Ant shots. And then Ant hits his step back over Holiday. Cat hits another shot. It was just really, he also had, I think Cat had 2 threes in the quarter. Just very, very impressive third quarter offense for Minnesota, and very, very limited turnovers to this point in the game. I think at halftime, the Wolves had 3 turnovers, if I'm not mistaken, and did a good job limiting that in the third quarter as well. And the recipe up to this point, like at the end of the third quarter, Minnesota was up 6 going to the fourth. The recipe through the third quarter was solid offense. Ant did a little bit of his, ISO ball stuff, but he was shooting the ball well enough, especially in the third, that it was fine. Like, he did it every few times on the floor, fine. But the Wolves were running sets to get Cat the ball. Cat was punishing mismatches, which we saw him do in Orlando on Tuesday night. We did not see him do it consistently in Dallas or the first time the Wolves played the Celtics. Remember Cat's, 10-point performance when Boston guarded him with Drew Holiday? In this game, he was not letting Boston simply just guard him with Jayson Tatum, one-on-one in the middle of the floor. The Wolves continually put him at the nail, at the top of the arc, in the center of the floor as well, and just kind of said, hey, Cat, go to work. They're not going to double you here. And he dominated. Whenever he got those touches, he dominated. He was played within himself, only had 1 single turnover, Karl-Anthony Towns did. So the recipe for the first 3 quarters was limited turnovers, crisp offense, and, they made enough shots. They didn't shoot the lights out in this game. Actually, they shot pretty well from deep. They ended up shooting 41%. But it was really more about getting the right shots and not turning it over. And they did that for the majority of the game. Now, in the fourth quarter, things shifted a little bit, but not until late. I mean, Minnesota was up with, under 4 minutes to play. It was like 3... Yeah, with 3:35 to play, Nickeil Alexander-Walker makes a tough layup, actually consecutive layups, sandwiched around a Jayson Tatum bucket. The Wolves are up 9 with 3:35 left. Horford hits a 3 to make it a 6-point game. The Wolves call a timeout. Next time down the floor, Anthony Edwards turns the ball over. He dribbled it off his foot in the middle of the paint. Celtics come back down, get a couple of free throws. Now they're within 4. But Alexander-Walker makes a 3, and the Wolves are back up 7 with 2:45 to play in this game. After a couple of empty possessions, this is the weird play, the weirdest play of the night. There had been some weird stuff. Actually, let's get to that next, and then I want to talk key takeaways because I do have 3 or 4. I don't want to dwell too long on the weird play at the end of regulation. But I want to talk about what happened after that, because I think it impacted the rest of the game, and then also what happened in overtime. Do key takeaways. We'll also do individual studs and duds. We'll do all of that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch your winnings roll in. There's still football going on this weekend, so you can, between football and basketball, take part in the combo projections as part of the Specials League. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. You can do this with more than just football and basketball, but this is, I think this weekend will be great for it on Saturday and Sunday, and also football Monday night. For example, you could take LeBron James and Travis Kelce. The Chiefs play the Saturday night game. Take a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions, pick more than or less than, and watch your winnings roll in. Plus, PrizePicks offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits in the first half and does not return to the second, that player can be rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so in the fourth quarter, the Wolves were still up 7 when this play happened with just over 2 minutes to play. Anthony Edwards, credit to him, and I want to talk about his shot selection here in a minute, but on this particular play, Ant was aggressive, got into the paint. Jrue Holiday goes up to try and contest Ant's shot, and the ball goes off the shot clock. Now, if an offensive player is shooting the ball and it goes off the shot clock, what has happened? Well, he's shooting the ball up and somebody comes down on his wrist and the ball goes straight up, or the ball gets blocked off the shot clock, maybe from behind, maybe from underneath. But simple physics would tell you that unless this person is a child shooting on a small hoop, like, you're not going to shoot the ball off the shot clock, right? So initially they ruled the ball out of bounds off of the Celtics Timberwolves ball, and they would have had a few seconds on the shot clock. Which seemed to be the right call, but on replay, it actually appeared as though Jrue Holiday hit the right wrist of Anthony Edwards as he was shooting, kind of like just below the wrist, up through the hand, knocking the ball out of bounds. So that's a foul, right? I understand hand's part of the ball. I know that that's officially that is the actual official rule. It's not like the fake tie goes the runner thing in baseball. It is actually hand is part of the ball, but it wasn't the hand. It was the wrist, which caused the ball to go out of bounds. To me, it was a clear foul, which they can add upon a challenge. And technically, then I think they could call the challenge successful because the call was changed. They should have done that, and they have applied a foul retroactively. We've seen them do that. And maybe, I guess, if you're not going to call a foul, you could argue that if the hand is part of the ball and he hits the hand and Ant's hand hits the ball off the shot clock, then I guess technically it could be off Minnesota. But I think you're inferring that. There was never a clear angle, at least not showed on the Timberwolves broadcast on Bally Sports North, that showed the ball going off of Anthony Edwards out of bounds. It was absolutely flabbergasting to me. And Chris Finch was beside himself on the sideline. You could even see him say, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but you could lip read him saying, I think it was JB DeRosa who was talking to the referee, saying, JB, if somebody comes down, and he made the hand motion. If you're watching YouTube, I'm waving my arms like crazy right now. If somebody comes down, the ball goes up, right? Like, if the offensive player isn't going to shoot the ball up off the shot clock, it's not going to be off the offensive player without there being a foul. And that's why Finch was apoplectic about it. It was just nuts. Now, the Wolves are up 7 with 2 minutes to play. This isn't an excuse. Like, you should still win this game 9 times out of 10. But instead, the Timberwolves allowed a fairly easy layup to Jayson Tatum, who, by the way, was being guarded by Kyle. Well, actually, at this point, I think Jaden McDaniels was back in the game. But Kyle Anderson had to guard McDaniels for a big chunk of the Kyle Anderson had to guard Jayson Tatum for a big chunk of the fourth quarter because of McDaniel's foul trouble, which was not ideal. Then right after the layup, Nickeil Alexander-Walker gets called for a cheap offensive foul push-off at half court, just dribbling the ball up the court. It was letter of the law, a foul. It's one of those things like accentuated by, I think it was Derek White that sold it. Alexander-Walker was a little too aggressive. I don't know why that call is not made, half the time down the floor, but it is right there. But here we are. Tatum hits a tough shot, a three-pointer. Now all of a sudden it's a 2-point game. The Wolves can't score. They go back and forth. Eventually the Celtics take a lead after Jayson Tatum misses a pair of free throws. The Celtics get the offensive rebound, and I couldn't tell on the replay whose fault it was. I think Alexander-Walker just kind of floated in to rebound and didn't bother putting a body on Derek White. Jrue Holiday makes a three-pointer. The Wolves are now down 2. Ultimately, Anthony Edwards gets fouled, makes the 2 buckets. The Wolves stop Tatum on the other end. This game goes to overtime. And then real quick in overtime, I don't need to go blow by blow here, but the Wolves got a 3-point lead right away in overtime. And then this was the second, I guess I will spend a minute here. This was the second turning point for me. The first one was the weird challenge with the Wolves up 7, and then easy bucket for Tatum, offensive foul Alexander-Walker, Celtics ball again. Like that sequence allowed things to kind of snowball for Minnesota. Right away in the overtime, Towns gets an and one. The Wolves are up 3. They get a stop on the other end. So now Wolves are up 3 with the ball with just over 4 minutes to play. Ant gets stuck in the corner, makes a bad pass. Jayson Tatum heads up the court with the steal, and McDaniels almost instinctively just kind of reached out and did barely grab the hip of Jayson Tatum. It was a foul. It was a silly foul. It was a cheap foul, but it was a foul. Insult to injury, it's a transition take foul. It's the first foul of the 2 you get in overtime, and it's the 6th foul on Jaden McDaniels. So now the Wolves are up against the limit in overtime, which meant that a few possessions later, when Naz Reid gave a cheap foul at half court for no reason, 40 feet from the basket, it was free throws for the Celtics. It was the first foul of overtime for the Wolves. It was a transition take foul, which allowed the Celtics a 3-point possession to tie the game again, and McDaniels was done for the night. That sequence with the Wolves up 3 and the ball, bad turnover from Ant, bad foul from McDaniels, Celtics tie the game up. And of course, Towns hit a 3 right after that. So those were back up 3. But that was, to me, with McDaniels fouling out, all those things happening, that was the other, I don't know if that's necessarily a turning point technically, but the seminal moment in this game when things kind of we can point to that as a moment when something significant happened. Bigger picture takeaways about this game. The Wolves played fantastic. They really did. I mean, if they played this way every night this season, if they played exactly this way every night this season, they're winning 80% of their games, 85% of their games. I mean, who's beating them when they play this well? Boston's unbelievable. They're an unbelievable team. That starting lineup is crazy. Jayson Tatum in this game. Jaylen Brown had 15 in the first quarter. He only had 17 at halftime. He just had 2 second quarter points. And Brown finished with 35. So he was good in the second half. Tatum, 45 points in this game on 26 shots. Was unreal. Here are my quibbles with this game, my issues with the game. Anthony Edwards, his shot selection was not up to par. It was not ideal in this game. Now, he still had a good game on paper, and he was good in the third quarter. He attempted 25 shots in this game. Okay, 25 shots. He shot 6 threes, 25 shots, and he attempted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 non-paint twos. And only 10 shots in the paint. So 6 threes, 9 non-paint twos, 10 paint attempts. And of those, only half of them were at the rim. He shot 4 10-footers or 5 10-footers. And he only made one of them, 8 to 10-footers. So the shot, and by the way, on those non-paint twos, the 9 of them, he only made 3. He was 3 of 9 on non-paint twos in this game, which we all know is the least efficient shot in basketball. And yes, we know Ant can make them. And yes, the bank shots are pretty when they go in. But the one issue with the Wolves offense in this game was Ant's shot selection. And he didn't have an assist early in this game. He ended up finishing with 6, I believe? Oh, no, he only had 3 assists in this game. He had 5 turnovers. 3 of Anthony Edwards' 5 turnovers were in the final 3 minutes of regulation or overtime. He had 2 in overtime. He had that big one with just about 3 minutes to play that I mentioned. He dribbled the ball off his foot in the paint. So 3 turnovers, 3 of his 5 were in the final 3 minutes of regulation plus overtime. again, overall, Ant played well. It was the shot selection, and it was some of those late turnovers that kind of sunk the Wolves. And turnovers in general, like the Wolves only turned it over, 9 times in the entire game? And Ant had 5 of them. Nobody else on the team had more than 1 turnover in this game. It was a clean game for Minnesota. Late turnovers, I mentioned already. Again, 3 of 5s. I just said this a couple times, but Ant had 3 late turnovers. As a team, I mean, Naz had a bad one. It was just, wasn't a problem for the whole game except for late. And then also McDaniel's foul trouble. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. But Jaden fouling out in just 24 minutes wasn't great. And then my last key takeaway, the Timberwolves needed to get Karl-Anthony Towns involved earlier. Like earlier this season, the first meeting between these two teams, the Celtics were daring the Wolves to try and play bully ball with Cat because they knew Jrue Holiday could bait Cat into fouls, offensive fouls. They knew he could strip the ball from him. They knew he could madden Karl-Anthony Towns, whatever. And it worked. And Cat had a bad game. The Wolves, of course, still won that game. In this game, Cat was great early. He was great in the third quarter. He was silent in the fourth quarter because Ant was just absorbing all the possessions. And Karl-Anthony Towns right away in overtime was like, all right, 3-point play, 3-pointer, like, get me the ball in the middle of the floor. I'm going to make things happen. The Celtics don't have a single player that can guard him one-on-one. At times, Horford tried it, but a lot of times it was Tatum. Sometimes it was Holiday. Like, the Celtics were very comfortable switching and leaving somebody on Cat. And they were also sending doubles at Anthony Edwards, even when the Wolves weren't screening for Ant. They were sending like a late double. If the shot clock got to like 5 or 6 and Ant had the ball in his hands, they were sending a second guy and trying to force the ball out of his hands. Ant hit a tough 3 over a double team from basically the right above the break on the right side in front of the Celtics bench. And he had a couple nice passes out of double teams too. Overall, I think he handled the pressure well. They were not doubling Karl-Anthony Towns. They were letting him operate, and Cat made them pay. I was a little surprised for the game. The Wolves shot 20 free throws. The Celtics shot 31. Cat only had 7 free throw attempts. Ant only had 4, but that was more due to his shot selection. I actually don't think Ant got the short end of the stick in this game officiating-wise. Maybe one time he could have gotten a call. I guess that dunk at the end of the first half was a little, Brown kind of shoved him in the small of his back. Cat only had 7 free throw attempts, which surprised me a little because he was aggressive in this game. But all that to say, it would have been great if the Wolves had gotten Karl more involved in the fourth quarter. And that's a little bit on Finch, like in some of those timeouts. And you saw that they called the first play of overtime was called for Karl-Anthony Towns to get the ball in the middle of the floor. And then it was like midway through the period, I think when they were down 3 or maybe down 2 midway through overtime, the cameras went to Finch and he was saying first play. They ran the exact same set that they opened overtime with to get Cat the ball. The Celtics covered it better and actually did bring a late double as Cat put the ball on the floor. They were going to try and draw that offensive foul. Cat did the right thing, passed it to Kyle. The ball swung around the perimeter, and eventually the Wolves, I think maybe Naz missed a 3 or something. It was the right basketball play from Cat, but something the Wolves should have done a little bit earlier in this game. And by that, I mean like earlier in crunch time of the fourth quarter, they should have gotten Cat the ball a little bit more frequently. All right, let's close this thing with individual studs and duds. That's what we'll do here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by Jase Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, and that's what this show is, of course, all about, is sports and escaping from the realities of real life. But can we just talk for a moment about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin, and we're still in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. There's certainly a helpless feeling involved with that, right? If somebody you love gets sick, kids, relatives, etc., and if there's a supply chain issue that might be keeping them for the life-saving medication that they need, we'll be okay, though, because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses that include UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, and more. This stuff could happen to anybody. Just visit jasemedical.com, though, and you can complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than it is today. Go to jasemedical.com and use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's jasemedical.com, offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order today. All right, just real quick recapping my key takeaways. Overall, really impressive performance for Minnesota. And, no Conley, no Rudy, best team in the league, second best defense next to the Wolves in the league. Really, really great game for Minnesota. My biggest issues were the lack of involvement for Cat in the fourth quarter related to that Anthony Edwards shot selection. He got hot in the third, and then all of a sudden it was mid-range jumper city. 9 of his 25 shot attempts by my count were non-paint twos. That's too many. Even though he's good at them and can make them if he needs to, like, I get it. It's fine. He can shoot a tough shot every now and again, end a shot clock, if he's feeling it, fine. It just didn't quite work in this one. The late turnovers for the Wolves in general, although most of those were Ants, 3 of Ants' 5 turnovers were in the final 3 minutes of regulation and overtime. And then also McDaniel's foul trouble, which actually is a pretty good segue into studs and duds. I'll start with duds because I made the segue. So why not? Jaden McDaniels in this game was really good defensively. I thought, like, he had some good contests at the end of regulation, good contest on Tatum. But his foul trouble, picking up that 5th foul, which was also kind of a cheap one, which I thought, by the way, the 5th foul call was a bad call. Not bad enough to challenge, and the Wolves didn't. But I thought McDaniels got to the spot before Tatum, and there was contact that Tatum initiated, and they called the foul on McDaniels. But that's the classic, like, McDaniels didn't fall down, right? So, of course, they're not going to call a charge because why? I don't know. Anyway, Tatum was awesome in this game. McDaniels did a really good job making his life difficult. And yet Tatum only had 2 assists. Took him, a little while to get going in this game. Jaylen Brown was really good early with Anthony Edwards guarding him. But McDaniels, I thought, was good when he was in the game. The problem was he only played 24 minutes. He picked up that 5th foul early in the fourth quarter, and the Wolves pretty much ended up with Kyle Anderson guarding Jayson Tatum for a chunk of the fourth quarter. And Kyle Anderson's a really good team defender. He's a passable, perimeter defender, and he's probably your 4th option in terms of guarding somebody like a Tatum on the perimeter. I know he has the size to do it, but it's just not a winning proposition against this version of Jayson Tatum. And Tatum went off. So, like, McDaniels has to be a dud in this game. 5 points on 2 of 8. Only 1 rebound, 1 assist in 24 minutes. He was a -12, which was actually the worst plus-minus on the Wolves in those 24 minutes. So a little bit of a rough game for McDaniels, but it was more about his lack of availability than it was his impact when he was actually in the game. So a tough one, but I'm going to give him a dud. He's actually the only one. I thought everybody else played well. The Wolves technically played 10 guys. Wendell Moore Jr. got, I think at the very end of the game, came in just for a moment defensively. But they played 9 rotation guys. Troy Brown Jr. got 8 minutes. Shake Milton got 9. Jordan McLaughlin played 17. And then you had 37 minutes from Naz Reid. The Wolves played huge in this game when McDaniels was in foul trouble. They, I got to go back and look at the minutes that I need to pull the lineups and see how often the 3 centers, or I guess Rudy didn't play, but how often Kat and Naz played together with Kyle Anderson at the 3. We know that he's obviously Slow-Mo's played a lot more 3 this year with Rudy Gobert in the fold and with Naz on this contract. We've seen more Slow-Mo at the 3 than at the 4, but he started at the 4 in this game with Kat sliding to the 5. So with the foul trouble to McDaniels, we saw a lot more of Anderson at the 3 in this game than expected. So I'm curious to kind of look at how those minutes actually broke down, but it was more about the foul trouble than anything else. Stud-wise, Karl-Anthony Towns, I thought was the best player on the floor for the Wolves. He was good defensively too. Like, he had some really nice possessions late in this game where he was defending straight up and down, not fouling, picked up a couple tough fouls that, were fouls, but, good defense, I thought, from Karl-Anthony Towns. He ended up fouling out on a, offensive foul kick out at the end of the game, which, by the way, that was his only turnover with 10 seconds left and the Wolves down 7. So it didn't matter. He didn't turn the ball over at all in this game besides that moment. Cat was awesome. 25 and 13, 6 assists, 2 steals, and I'll call it 0 turnovers because who cares about that with 10 seconds left in the game? That's a garbage time offensive foul. 8 of 17 shooting. 7 of 7 at the line. The only issue was the 2 of 7 from outside the arc. He rushed a couple of those again, but he also had a couple go in and out that he usually makes. And that's, he was 5 of 5 the other nights or Tuesday night. So, it happens. Great Cat game. One of his probably top 5 games of the year. Not probably, it was a top 5 game of the year for him. Another stud for me, got to go Kyle Anderson. I haven't even really talked about Slow-Mo or Nickeil Alexander-Walker yet, but I'll go Kyle Anderson for a stud. Really good in this game. And of course, he's had a little bit of a rough season. 17, 8, and 5 in this game, 7 of 12 shooting. And the Celtics were content to let him, give him plenty of space, try and dare him to shoot. Instead, he ate up that space with his slow-mo dribble into the paint, hit a bunch of weird scoop shots, like classic YMCA, old dad type shots. Like, it was awesome. Like slow hook shots, scoop shots, weird floaters, just a classic slow-mo type game. It's like what I remember him doing with the Grizzlies against the Wolves for, 4 straight years. 17, 8, and 5, a steal and a block, no turnovers for slow-mo in 39 minutes. This is a guy that's been playing, recently, 15 minutes or so off the bench of late, and he was pressed into duty in this one and played really well. I'm also going to give a stud to Nickeil Alexander-Walker. 15 points on 5 of 8, 3 of 5 outside the arc, and he was massive late in that fourth quarter when the Wolves needed his offense. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, of all people, playing point guard in this game, went off. I mean, he had a couple of tough layups I mentioned right around that 4-minute mark. He also hit a big three. He had a flurry there between the 4.5 and 2.5 minute marks in the fourth quarter where he scored 7 consecutive points for the Wolves and was just really, really solid. He was good defensively, tough cover, obviously, kind of vacillating between, all of these tough perimeter players for Boston. And I thought he was solid on that end of the floor. 15 points on 8 shots, 3 of 5 on threes, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 steal, 1 block, only 1 turnover when he effectively ran the offense for Minnesota for chunks of this game. Really good Alexander-Walker game. So my 3 studs are Cat, Slow-Mo, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. It was fine. I'm not giving him a stud because of all the reasons we already talked about. I got to go 4 for this game. Naz Reid gets the 4th one. He was great. 19 and 10 off the bench, plus 3 blocks, 3 assists, 37 minutes. And this was, thought maybe you'd see some Luka Garza minutes. No. Naz was awesome in this game. And he didn't get himself into major foul trouble. Him and Cat both did a really good job with that. They were both able to play, 37 minutes for Naz, 44 for Cat. They were able to stay on the floor, be effective, not get in unnecessary foul trouble, despite the 31 free throws Boston shot, which, by the way, they went 30 of 31 at the line. It's unreal. Really strong game from Naz Reid off the bench for Minnesota. And great to see him continue to play really well here of late. J-Mac played well. McLaughlin played good in his 17 minutes, I thought. Brown was fine. I already talked about Shake. Shake Milton was impressive in his brief run as well. Nothing really bad to say about this other than the Ant shot selection and the turnovers late. And this was a great performance against a great team. And now we go back to worrying about the Wolves not doing what they did last year and struggling against what should be easy. I shouldn't say easy. Beatable competition, right? This gauntlet of 16 games. We'll talk more about it on Friday's show, kind of recapping it. But the Wolves ended up going 9-7, which is totally fine. I think at the start of it, I was hoping for 10-6. They almost stole one in Boston. This was a really strong stretch for Minnesota and a good game to cap it off on. Now, 5 of the next 6 are at home. They get Portland Friday night. We'll talk about it on Friday's show. That is obviously a winnable game. Sunday against the Clippers will be interesting. That's the one after that. So we'll talk a little bit about that Friday too, since we won't have a show between Friday and Sunday. All right, that's all we have for you today on the show. If you missed the live postcast, it's the episode right before this. Jack Borman joined Luke Inman of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Check out that audio if you missed it live. And then, of course, we'll have a show for you again Friday. We'll get you ready for the weekend of games versus the Trailblazers and the LA Clippers. We'll cover all that on Friday's show. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.